You've done this. I know you've done this. You're walking through downtown. Chicago, New York, Dallas, doesn't matter. You get to the base of one of those glass towers and you stop, and you tilt your head back until your neck hurts trying to see the top. And you can't. And for 2 seconds you feel very, very small. Then the second thought. The one nobody says out loud. Somebody owns that. Somebody's name is on a piece of paper that says this entire vertical zip code is mine. 90 floors of people making spreadsheets and drinking terrible coffee, and one entity collects rent on all of it. I've been in and around commercial real estate for about 12 years. I've underwritten these buildings. I've walked their mechanical floors at 7 in the morning. I've sat in a conference room while 4 grown adults argued for 3 hours about something called a loss factor. And yes, I'll explain that. And yes, it's more interesting than it sounds. Here's the thing I wish somebody had told me on day 1, before I spent 2 years being impressed by the wrong numbers. Almost nobody makes money owning a skyscraper, not the way you're picturing it. The money is somewhere else. It's in the dirt underneath. It's in the debt wrapped around it. And it's in about 6 revenue lines that have nothing to do with office space. So let's go up. Start at the bottom. Quick question. What's the most expensive thing in a skyscraper? Not the steel, not the glass, not the elevators, and we are going to talk a lot about elevators. It's permission. Every city has zoning, and zoning gives you a number called FAR, floor area ratio, the ratio of buildable square footage to the size of your lot. Own 10,000 square feet of dirt with an FAR of 15? You build 150,000 square feet. That's your ceiling. Legally, literally, which means the product a developer is buying isn't land. It's the right to stack air. And in New York, air is for sale. Separately, if the guy next door didn't use all his FAR, he can sell you the leftovers, air rights. In prime Midtown, that's traded in the hundreds of dollars per square foot, for nothing physical, for the right to build in a space that already exists and currently contains nothing but weather. First guy who explained this to me was a developer named Dennis. Cigar, terrible golf swing, the kind of man who says kid unironically. He goes, "Kid, I'm not in the building business. I'm in the FAR business. The building is just how I collect it." And when a city really wants a tower, it'll sell you height directly. One Vanderbilt in Manhattan exists partly because the developer bought into a rezoning and agreed to fund a couple $100 million of subway work under Grand Central. That was the trade. You want the extra floors? Fix our transit. So before a single beam goes vertical, you've spent 9 figures on things you cannot touch. Now let's build it. And here's where normal intuition falls apart. You'd assume a 40-story building costs twice what a 20-story costs. Same footprint, double the floors, double the price. Nope. Cost per square foot climbs as you go up, and it climbs in steps, not a smooth line, because at certain heights, the physics changes on you. Around 40 stories, wind stops being weather and becomes a structural problem. You're not designing for gravity anymore. You're designing for lateral load. The building wants to sway, and the humans inside get seasick. So you add a thicker core, or outrigger trusses, or a diagonal exoskeleton, and every pound of that produces 0 rent. Go higher, and you eventually need a damper. Taipei 101 has a steel ball hanging inside it that weighs around 660 metric tons, and its whole job is to swing the other way when the building leans. And here's my favorite part. It looked so cool they made it a tourist attraction, merchandise, a mascot. They took a structural liability and turned it into a gift shop. Hold on to that. Elevators are the reason skyscrapers exist. They're also the reason they stop. Think about it mechanically. Everybody on floor 80 has to get to floor 80. That takes a shaft. That shaft passes through floors 1 through 79. It occupies space on every one of them and earns rent on none. So the taller you build, the more of your building is a hole. There's a guy named Gus, chief engineer at a Midtown tower for something like 28 years, and he took me up to a mechanical floor once, floor 45, no windows. chillers and pumps and a noise like a jet on a runway. He waves his arm around and says, "Everything you're standing in makes $0 and it's the most expensive floor in the building." That's the whole trade, in one sentence. In a normal 8-story office building, maybe 85 to 90% of gross square footage is rentable. In a super tall, once you subtract core, shafts, mechanical floors, refuge floors, structure, that can slide towards 70% or worse in the lower half. You're paying to build space you can never lease. On purpose. Because there's no other way to get to the top. The industry fights back with sky lobbies, double-decker cars, and dispatch software that groups you with people going to similar floors. Clever engineering. It buys you height. It does not buy you free height. Which brings me to my favorite argument in this entire business. Loss factor. Here's the scam. And I say that with affection, because it's legal, disclosed, and everybody does it. When a tenant leases 10,000 square feet in a tower, they don't receive 10,000 square feet. They get maybe 7,500 they can put desks in, plus a share of the lobby, the elevator banks, the bathrooms, the hallways. The gap between usable and rentable is the loss factor. In Manhattan, it's often 25 to 30%, sometimes more. I watched a broker named Marisol run a lease negotiation years ago. She got the landlord to knock $4 a foot off the asking rent. Handshakes, smiles, everybody happy. Then she went back into the document and recut the loss factor, and that saved her client about 3 times what the rent concession did. The CFO never understood what happened. He'd been staring at the headline rent the whole time. That's this entire industry in one story. Everyone watches the price. The money's in the definitions. Fine, it's built, it's leased. Where does the cash come from? Office rent, obviously. And there's a real view premium. Higher floors lease higher, usually a fraction of a percent per floor, more if there's a park or a river in the window. But if office rent were the whole story, nobody would build these. Rent alone almost never justifies super tall construction cost. The good ones stack other stuff on top. 1. The observation deck. This is the number that rewired my brain. The Empire State Building's observatory has, in strong years, pulled in well north of $100 million of revenue on roughly 2% of the building's square footage. High margin. Cash collected before delivery. No tenant improvement allowance. No free rent period. No broker commission. Just a turnstile. I met an ops manager at a deck like this once, Nadia, and she said something I still repeat. We're not a building amenity. We're a theme park that happens to have offices underneath it. She's right. Timed entry. The ticket upsell. The photo you didn't want and bought anyway. A gift shop you physically cannot exit without walking through. Disney economics bolted onto a real estate asset. Remember the damper mascot? Same instinct. 2. The roof. Antennas. Broadcast tenants. Cell carriers. Microwave links. A tall building in a dense city is prime radio real estate, and those leases are nearly pure margin because the space already existed and nobody cleans it. 3. Retail at the base. The bottom 2 floors touch a sidewalk, and sidewalk square footage in a good location rents for multiples of what floor 60 gets. 4. Naming rights. Here's a twist most people get backwards. You'd assume the company on the side of the building wrote a giant check. Often it's the opposite. Naming rights get thrown in as a lease concession. The tenant takes a huge block of space, the name rides along. The landlord is trading the most famous thing about the asset for occupancy to a tenant who might be gone in 15 years. Now the other column. This is where the romance dies. Property taxes. In most big American cities, commercial property tax is the single largest operating expense in the building, routinely a third of total OPEX. And you don't negotiate it. You appeal it, you hire a firm to fight the assessment, and then you pay it anyway. Then, energy, water, security, cleaning, insurance, on a trophy tower. After 2001, terrorism coverage became its own line item. Then the ugly one that never makes the pitch deck, the facade. That glass curtain wall has a service life. 30 to 40 years before gaskets harden, seals fail, and water finds its way in. Replacing the skin of a super tall is a capital event measured in hundreds of millions, and you do it while thousands of people are working inside. Nobody buys a tower thinking about the year. 3, 5, curtain wall. Everybody who's held one long enough thinks about nothing else. Then elevators need modernization. Chillers need replacing. Code changes and you're retrofitting. A skyscraper isn't an asset that sits there. It decays on a published schedule. And you either fund that schedule or sell the problem to somebody else and let them find out. Okay, this next part is the one I actually want you to walk away with. Take revenue, subtract operating expenses, and you get NOI, net operating income. Everything in commercial real estate collapses down to that number. To get value, you divide NOI by a cap rate. Say a tower throws off $50 million of NOI. At a 5% cap rate, that building's worth $1 billion. Now change nothing about the building. Same tenants, same rents, same guy at the security desk. Just move the cap rate to 7%. 50 divided by 0.07 is about 714 million. You just lost $286 million and not one person moved out. That's exactly what happened across the American office market. When rates went vertical, cap rates track the cost of money. Buildings that hadn't lost a single tenant lost a third of their value on a spreadsheet for reasons that had nothing to do with the building. And that's before the debt. Nobody buys these with cash. You borrow 65% of value. For about a decade, money was almost free, so the math was gorgeous. Buy at a 5 cap, borrow at 3.5, and the gap between those numbers is your return. You're not a landlord at that point. You're running a carry trade with a lobby. Then the loan matures. I've got a friend, Priya, who places debt on big assets. In 2023, she called me and said, "I'm not a mortgage broker anymore. I'm a hospice nurse." Her whole job had become telling owners what their refinance would cost. Building bought in 2019, 5-year floating loan at 3 and change. Loan comes due. New quote is 7+. And the property still cash flows. It just doesn't cash flow enough to cover the new payment. So the lender wants fresh equity, and the owner decides whether to write a 9-figure check to keep a building he already owns. Multiply that by more than $1 trillion of mortgages maturing in a compressed window, and you get the last 3 years of headlines. Towers handed back to lenders. Not because the building broke, because the spread did. So write this down. A skyscraper isn't an asset. It's a spread, and spreads go negative. One more trap. And it's a spectacular one. Sometimes you buy the building, but not the land. The dirt belongs to somebody else. A church, a university, a family trust. You pay ground rent on a lease that runs 99 years with periodic resets tied to the current value of the land. And land in Manhattan does not go down over 99 years. The Chrysler Building, one of the most beautiful objects human beings have ever made. Sold in 2008 for somewhere around $800 million. Sold again in 2019 for about $150 million. The ground rent reset. Payments to the landowner climbed into the tens of millions, and suddenly the most photographed spire in America was worth less than a decent penthouse because the math underneath it had turned into a wood chipper. You can own the most famous building on Earth and still not own the ground it's standing on. So why does anyone build these? By now you should be asking. In 1999, an analyst named Andrew Lawrence published the Skyscraper Index. His observation: record-breaking towers have a nasty habit of topping out right as the economy rolls over. Empire State, 1,931, straight into the Depression. It sat so empty, people called it the Empty State Building, and by most accounts, it took the better part of 2 decades to become a real earner. Sears Tower, 1,973, into stagflation. Petronas, 1,997. Asian financial crisis. Burj Khalifa, 2009. Dubai asking for help. Is the tower causing the crash? No, that's silly. It's a symptom of the same fever. Record towers get approved when credit is cheap and confidence is unlimited, and both of those end at the same time. Construction takes 5 to 7 years, so the ribbon cutting lands in the wreckage. Which gets at the real reason a lot of super talls exist. They're not investments, they're marketing. The Burj Khalifa as a standalone building is not a great return, but it made every square meter around it valuable. The mall, the hotels, the whole district. The tower was the loss leader that repriced a neighborhood. That's not a real estate deal, that's an ad campaign with a foundation. And sometimes it's simpler. Sometimes a guy wants his name on the skyline. I've met these people. They're charming. They are not maximizing IRR. Quick detour. Because a lot of the pencil-thin towers going up aren't offices at all. Super slim residential super talls sell views by the square foot at prices that don't feel real. And the model works beautifully. For the developer, he sells, takes the profit, hands over the keys, leaves. The buyer is the one holding it. I've got a friend, I'll call him Rob because he'd genuinely kill me, who bought high in one of these. Paid a number that made me physically uncomfortable to hear out loud. Then he found out what isn't in the brochure. Common charges plus taxes running into 5 figures a month. Elevator outages that strand you at altitude, which is a special problem when your apartment is 1,000 feet up. And a resale market where the only comparable units are the 11 identical ones your neighbors are also quietly trying to unload. He sold. Took a haircut that would have bought a very nice house in most of this country. This isn't rare. Several marquee billionaires' row units have resold below what the original buyer paid. One famous full-floor apartment went for north of $90 million and resold years later for meaningfully less, in a market where everything else went up. Because a trophy condo isn't housing. It's a collectible with a maintenance bill. Let me tell you about Walt. Walt's a retired school teacher, and Walt's grandfather did something in 1961 that I think about constantly. When the Empire State Building got syndicated, the sponsors chopped the investment into thousands of small participation units and sold them to regular people for $10,000 each. Dentists, teachers, guys who owned one hardware store, ordinary people buying a slice of the most famous building in the world. Walt's grandfather bought one, held it, passed it down. Decades later, when the whole thing got rolled into a public REIT, those units were worth many multiples of that 10 grand, and they'd been paying out the whole time in between. Walt never managed a building, never appealed a tax assessment, never argued about a loss factor, never lay awake at 3 a.m. thinking about curtain wall replacement. He owned a piece of paper attached to a cash flow and let time do the work. That's the punchline of this whole video. The people who reliably make money off skyscrapers are the landowner, the lender, the contractor, the leasing brokers, the elevator maintenance company, and the passive investors who bought at a sane basis and then refused to be interesting about it. The guy whose name is on the deed, he's got the risk, the personal guarantee, and the phone call from Priya in year 5. So here's the reframe, and then I'll let you go. A skyscraper looks like a monument. It isn't one. It's a machine that converts land value into rentable air. And every floor you add makes the machine more expensive to run and slightly worse at its job. What you own isn't the tower. It's a spread between the yield the building produces and the cost of the money you use to buy it. When that spread is wide, you look like a genius and people put you on magazine covers. When it flips, nothing about the building changes. Same glass, same lobby, same view. You just can't afford it anymore. So next time you're downtown doing the neck crane thing, see it differently. You're not looking at somebody's wealth. You're looking at somebody's leverage. If you got something out of this, subscribe. I do one of these every week on a different business nobody thinks about. And drop a comment with the building in your city you've always wondered about. I read them. I've stolen episode ideas from you people before and I'll do it again. See you next one.